This guy was such a nerd in high school. Coming from a single parent home, he couldn't afford college, so he's just a high school graduate. Can you believe someone's just a high school dropout these days? The words echoed through the upscale restaurant's private dining room, making the expensive crystal glasses seem to vibrate with secondhand embarrassment. He says he works in the food industry, but he's just at some ramen shop. Come on, why try to make it sound fancy? At yet another blind date where I was invited as a prop, my former classmate was looking down on me again. I could only sigh at his familiar behavior, the weight of years of similar comments settling on my shoulders like a well-worn coat. I'm Jack Thompson. After graduating high school, I started working at a traditional ramen shop in my neighborhood, and I've been there ever since. Or at least that's what Blake Wilson thinks. The memory of my mother's face when I told her about my decision not to go to college still haunts me sometimes. She had worked 2 jobs to support us after my father left, and I knew she blamed herself for not being able to provide more. You should go to college, Jack, she had said, her hands worn from years of cleaning houses and serving food. Education is important. I dodged the topic, saying, I have something I want to do. But the truth was, I couldn't bear to watch her work herself to exhaustion trying to pay for my education. We didn't have much money, and I knew college would be a financial strain that might break her. The ramen shop wasn't part of some grand plan. It was just a random job I found in our neighborhood. But sometimes, life has a funny way of turning random chances into destiny. I got lucky with a great owner, Tanaka-san, who became more of a mentor than a boss, and wonderful staff who made it an enjoyable workplace. Tanaka-san was old school, believing in teaching everything from the ground up. To make great ramen, he would say, wiping sweat from his brow as he showed me how to properly knead the noodle dough, you must first understand the heart of each ingredient. While I was proud of our ramen shop and had nothing to be ashamed of, whenever people asked about my job, I'd simply say I worked in the food industry. Since I had various roles due to my long tenure, it was easy to sum it up in one phrase. Most people accepted this answer, but there was one person who always sneered at it. Blake Wilson, my high school classmate. Blake and I were never particularly close. In fact, we barely interacted. In high school, he was known for his bleached hair and wearing his uniform sloppily, constantly getting reprimanded by teachers. While he was outgoing, pushy would be a better description, he would openly brag about dating multiple girls at once and hitting on other guys' girlfriends. I still remember the day he got into a fight with the captain of the soccer team for flirting with his girlfriend. The entire schoolyard gathered to watch as teachers rushed to break it up. Blake was infamous for waiting for girls from other schools at the gate and being seen around town with a different girl every time. We were in the same class once, but we probably only spoke 2 or 3 times. So I had no way of having his contact information. But one day, I ran into him at a trendy bar in Ginza. Wait, Jack. Is that you? I was startled when this stranger suddenly called out to me. The man who called out was dressed head to toe in designer brands, with a well-toned tan body. Even I could tell these clothes were expensive. His Rolex gleamed under the bar's ambient lighting, and his perfectly styled hair spoke of regular visits to high-end salons. At first, I couldn't recognize him, responding with an awkward, but the man grinned and said, What? You don't remember? It's me, Blake! That's when I finally remembered. It was that pushy Blake from high school. The years had changed his appearance, but that self-satisfied smirk remained exactly the same. It's you, Jack! Man, you haven't changed at all. He kept slapping my shoulder, finding something amusing that I couldn't understand. The expensive cologne he wore wafted through the air with each moment. Blake told me he graduated from Harvard and now worked at a major advertising agency. He volunteered information I didn't need to know, like how he was having a blind date with some cute girls today. Seems he was living quite the flashy lifestyle. What are you doing in a place like this? He asked, gesturing around at the upscale bar with its marble countertops and crystal decanters. It's work-related, I replied simply. Oh? So, what are you doing these days? When asked, I gave my usual response of, I work in the food industry. Blake burst out laughing, the sound drawing attention from nearby patrons. Don't tell me you're still working at that ramen shop. I felt slightly annoyed at being suddenly laughed at, but getting worked up over this guy would be a waste of time. Blake had always looked down on me for some reason, even back in high school when he barely knew me. When I replied, yeah, I am, Blake laughed even harder, saying, no way! You didn't go to college, right? Don't tell me you're still just working part-time at a ramen shop. That's pretty bad, man. Working part-time at your age is hilarious. Well, it's not just the ramen shop. I tried to correct him as I was getting uncomfortable with all the laughing, but he cut me off with a dismissive, yeah. No need to try to make food industry sound fancy. As Blake wiped tears from his eyes, saying he hadn't laughed this hard in ages, I lost any desire to correct him. Some people are so convinced of their own superiority that they can't see beyond their preconceptions. Just as I was thinking about leaving, Blake suddenly pulled out his phone. Its latest model case, probably worth more than what most people spend on a week's groceries. Give me your number. I've got lots of money, so I'll treat you to some good food sometime. His mocking tone irritated me slightly. The condescension as thick as the leather on his designer wallet. No, that's okay. I can invite lots of cute girls too. He showed me his phone screen, which displayed photos of him with various women posing with fancy dishes at restaurants. The women all had that particular look. The kind of polished beauty that comes from careful curation of one's social media presence. Girls like these! Isn't it great to eat food with pretty girls? Isn't it great to eat good food with pretty girls? The food in the sliding photos did look delicious. To be honest, I didn't care about meeting women, but I was interested in the restaurants. They were all famous places I'd been wanting to check out. Blake seemed to know not just the trending restaurants, but also many good places I hadn't heard of. Being in the food industry myself, visiting various types of restaurants would be educational. Even if his motives were less than pure, there might be something to gain from the situation. So come on, let's go eat! Blake's intention to use me as a prop for blind dates was obvious. He wanted someone to make himself look better by comparison, a classic tactic of insecure people. But if he was going to use me, I might as well use him too. I agreed to exchange numbers if schedules permitted, and after that, I started getting invited to blind dates regularly. Blake seemed to be quite the player, hosting blind dates almost weekly. Not only were the women different every time, but the venues rarely repeated. I was impressed by his research skills, though it was somewhat disappointing that all this effort was just for blind dates. He could probably be quite successful if he applied the same dedication to his actual work. Today, another Blake-organized blind date was happening. Given how many times he'd insisted, I've got some gorgeous models lined up. You absolutely have to come. He must really want to get close to someone. It was Blake's usual tactic to put me down while showing off his own success and wealth. Of course, it was irritating, but engaging with him seriously would just be a waste of energy. While I wasn't interested in models, the venue was another place I'd been wanting to visit, so I reluctantly agreed to go along. Tonight's venue was a somewhat upscale restaurant known for its sophisticated atmosphere and French-inspired creative cuisine. The soft lighting and modern decor created an ambiance that whispered of refinement and exclusivity. We were supposed to meet at the entrance, and the first thing Blake did was warn me. "I'm going after Mia, okay? I'm seriously betting everything on today. I'm definitely going to win Mia over, so don't get in my way." He glared at me sharply, but I didn't even know who this Mia was. His intensity seemed almost comical, like a teenager with his first crush rather than a supposedly successful businessman. "That's why I splurged on this high-end restaurant. I invited you too, so read the room, okay?" Even if I told Blake I was only interested in the restaurant and food, he probably wouldn't believe me. His worldview seemed unable to accommodate the idea that someone might not share his priorities. Even when I just nodded non-committally, Blake continued getting excited on his own. "Mia has like 1 million followers on social media, and she's super cute. Plus, she's got an amazing body." I was lost for words as he drooled while saying he absolutely had to get her. It was hard to believe that this was the same person who'd been bragging about his Harvard education earlier. Looking at my watch, it was almost time to start. So I somehow managed to end the conversation and headed into the restaurant. The maître d' led us through the main dining room, past tables of well-dressed patrons enjoying their meals. In the private room, 3 women were already there. Being models, they were indeed all beautiful, but there was something more than just physical beauty about them, a kind of presence that came from confidence and success. "Sorry to keep you waiting," Blake smiled, and an especially beautiful woman responded with a lovely smile saying, "Nice to meet you." I learned during introductions that she was Mia, and seeing her beauty, I could understand why Blake was so worked up. She had an elegance that went beyond mere appearance, the kind of grace that comes from genuine self-assurance rather than practiced poses. The blind date started with a toast led by the experienced Blake. After introductions, Blake's bragging continued endlessly, each story more grandiose than the last. As usual, I just took photos of the dishes as they arrived and made notes about what I noticed. The plating was particularly interesting. There was a creative use of negative space that I hadn't seen before. "This guy just keeps taking pictures of the food. He's such a nerd." Blake made an insincere apology, and that started his usual pattern of looking down on me. I didn't mind and continued eating while taking notes about the taste. The sauce on the duck breast had an interesting complexity. Perhaps a reduction with some kind of aged vinegar? I would respond when addressed, but time mostly passed with Blake chatting with the women. His stories grew more elaborate with each glass of wine, each tale designed to paint himself as the hero. "By the way, isn't this place super popular? How did you manage to get a reservation?" When Mia asked this, Blake leaned forward as if he'd been waiting for it, like a fisherman who finally got a bite. "Actually, I know the owner." The woman responded with exaggerated, "Wow, amazing," to Blake's conspiratorial whisper. The politeness was professional grade. I had to admire their composure. Pleased with their reaction, Blake continued dragging out the topic of knowing the owner. For someone who said to keep it a secret, he sure was talking a lot about it, I thought with amusement. Suddenly, I heard, "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson?" and looked up. Somehow, Mia had moved to sit in front of me. The subtle fragrance of her perfume carried notes of jasmine and something else I couldn't quite place. "Have we met somewhere before?" "Huh?" My heart skipped a beat at what sounded like a pickup line, even though I knew better, even knowing it wasn't meant that way. I still got nervous when a beautiful woman said it. Some things never change, no matter how successful you become. You look familiar. No, that can't be. Surely I wouldn't forget meeting such a beautiful woman. Her features were striking, the kind that would leave an impression. As I was about to say she must be mistaken, Blake interrupted with, "No way! This guy's got such a plain face. He probably just looks like someone you've seen on the street." Blake laughed loudly and continued, "Someone like him would never be involved in your life. Not even 0.001%. While that was true, his blatantly condescending comment made the women's faces twitch slightly in discomfort. Even in the dimmed lighting of the private room, their disapproval was clear. Trying to elevate himself by putting others down, and not even realizing how it made him look worse. It was almost sad how he couldn't see the effect his behavior had on others. Then Blake started another round of his boring bragging. "The other day, I worked with some celebrities." Blake was as smug as ever. He was getting excited talking about introducing them to well-known actors and comedians whose names you'd often hear on TV. Each name he dropped seemed to carry less weight than the last. Since it had nothing to do with me, I was taking photos of the newly arrived dishes and writing notes when Mia spoke to me again. "Mr. Thompson, are you on social media?" "No, not really." When I tilted my head at the sudden topic change, she seemed to notice my confusion and added, "I was wondering because you're taking so many photos." When she said she thought I might be posting them online, I finally understood. Her interest seemed genuine, unlike Blake's performative attention. "Oh, no, it's because I work in the food industry." The moment I answered, I noticed Blake's malicious grin. It was like watching a predator that thought it had cornered its prey. "What are you trying to act fancy for? In the food industry? You're just at a ramen shop." At Blake's words, the women who had been enjoying themselves looked at me with wide eyes of surprise. Their faces seemed to say that they couldn't believe it, that it must be a joke. The elegant atmosphere of the private dining room suddenly felt charged with tension. "This guy was such a nerd in high school. Coming from a single-parent home, he couldn't even go to college, just a high school graduate. Isn't that pretty bad these days? Plus, he's still working part-time at the ramen shop he started at, even now at 30. Working part-time at this age is so lame. No wonder he tries to make it sound fancy by saying food industry." I started to say that it wasn't about appearances, but Blake's momentum in putting me down couldn't be stopped. His words tumbled out faster and faster, like he was afraid someone might interrupt his moment of triumph. "You know, I usually only treat girls, but I especially treat Jack because he's poor. I mean, I've got money to spare, so treating someone like him is nothing. As an elite, we've got to show some mercy to poor people. Aren't I super nice for treating someone like him?" The women only returned forced smiles when Blake asked, "Right?" They were clearly put off, but Blake, probably due to the alcohol, didn't notice. The expensive wine had loosened his tongue, but hadn't improved his judgment. He just kept drinking contentedly after putting me down. In his mind, he probably thought he'd improved his standing. The crystal wine glass in his hand caught the light as he raised it for another self-satisfied sip. Just as I was about to sigh, it happened. "I think I'll post this on social media too." Mia brightened the awkward atmosphere with her cheerful tone. Her voice cut through the tension like a fresh breeze through stale air. Taking out her phone, she snapped a photo of an untouched dish. The way she angled the phone showed she knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't amateur food photography. As if on cue, the other women also started taking photos of their food. Their movements were practiced, professional. They knew how to capture the best angles, how to make the lighting work in their favor. After taking several shots, Mia elegantly took a bite. Delicious! She smiled after one bite, her expression genuine with appreciation. But it might look better if it were a bit more colorful. I couldn't help but respond to her muttered comment. Her observation had caught my professional interest. What do you mean? Despite my eager question, Mia gave me a gentle smile. There was something knowing in her expression, as if she understood more than she was letting on. These days, photogenic food is more popular. Taste is important, of course, but beautiful colors catch people's attention, so I think some green here would make it better. She pointed to part of the plate with a perfectly manicured finger. The way she analyzed the presentation reminded me of my own early days studying food photography. I see. Appearance is certainly important. I thought I'd been paying attention to it, but I hadn't considered the perspective of how it photographs. The rise of social media had changed the game in ways I was still learning to navigate. Also, the garnish and sauce colors can make it look completely different. Ah, the garnish! The plate choice can make a difference too. Mia kept giving me detailed advice that I wouldn't have thought of. Her understanding of visual appeal and marketing was impressive. Clearly, she was more than just another pretty face with a social media account. As I was taking notes, Blake, apparently unhappy with me talking to Mia, roughly put down his glass. The crystal made a sharp sound against the wooden table. Read the room, will you? Acting like a chef when you're just a ramen shop part-timer? Who needs fancy plating for ramen? The atmosphere instantly became tense with Blake's irritated manner. The alcohol had stripped away even the thin veneer of politeness he'd been maintaining. You're making the food taste bad. Just go home already. Huh? He'd never complained before when I took food photos or made notes. Just looked down on me. This was new territory, even for Blake. As I stared in surprise, Blake glared at me and clicked his tongue in annoyance. His face had grown red, though whether from anger or alcohol was hard to tell. Just leave. Can't you tell you're ruining the mood? I swallowed the words, "You're the one ruining the mood," and instead said, "But we're still in the middle of the course." I wanted to hear more of Mia's advice about the remaining dishes, but Blake was clearly intent on getting rid of me. His jealousy was as transparent as the wine in his glass. Shut up, you poor loser! This place is too good for bottom feeders like you. You're out of place here. You're making the food taste bad just by being here. He waved his hand as if shooing away a pest, and the atmosphere became completely awkward. The other diners at the table shifted uncomfortably in their seats. If I stayed any longer, things would only get worse. It was a shame to miss the chance for good advice, but nothing could be done now. Deciding to come back alone another time, I stood up with my belongings. The chair scraped softly against the carpeted floor as I pushed it back. As Blake's laughter, "Go home and make ramen, poor boy," echoed behind me. I reached for the door just as new dishes were being brought in. The male server balancing the tray looked at me and said, "Chairman, are you leaving?" Before I could respond, Blake's dumbfounded voice rang out in the silent room. Chairman? Chairman? Did he say chairman? Am I hearing things? Am I that drunk? Blake laughed. Brother, you must be mistaken. This guy's just a ramen shop part-timer. The server looked at me with a puzzled expression. I recognized him as one of our newest hires. Thomas, I believed his name was. Excuse me, but aren't you Jack Thompson, chairman of Thompson International? When I nodded, saying, yes, that's right, Blake shouted, what? His voice cracked slightly on the word, his composure completely shattered. The server asked respectfully, the owner would like to greet you before you leave. Would you mind waiting a moment? So I nodded again. My journey to becoming chairman started with meeting a certain person. It wasn't the kind of story people expected. There was no inheritance, no family connections, just hard work and a bit of luck. After working at the ramen shop for several years, a foreigner named William came to the store. He was a tall, lanky man. With wire-rimmed glasses and an infectious enthusiasm for Japanese cuisine. He was apparently moved by our ramen, repeatedly saying how delicious it was. His genuine appreciation for the craft was evident in the way he savored every bowl, asking questions about ingredients and techniques. Then he suggested that this taste would definitely sell in America and asked if we would like to work together. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he laid out his vision. The shop owner was over 60 and refused, saying it was impossible. "Our ramen is meant for Japanese tastes," he said, shaking his head. "Americans wouldn't understand it." However, William was determined to expand to America with our recipe and started coming to our shop every day. His persistence was remarkable. Rain or shine, he would be there, often bringing different friends to try the ramen. The standoff between William and the owner continued, but William's passion was incredible, and he showed no signs of giving up. He would sit at the counter for hours watching us work, taking notes, asking questions. Before long, I started having simple English conversations with William, who had become a regular. Looking back, my English must have been painfully basic. "This very good ramen," I would say, pointing at the bowl. "The best ramen I've ever had," William would reply, speaking slowly and clearly so I could understand. Still, William never laughed at me and earnestly engaged in conversation using broken Japanese and gestures. He would draw pictures when words failed, making everyone in the shop laugh with his enthusiastic attempts at communication. As I talked with him, my dreams expanded, and for the first time, I found something I wanted to do. Until then, I had no aspirations and had resigned myself to a mediocre life, thinking this was all I deserved. The idea of taking our ramen to America seemed impossible at first, but William's enthusiasm was contagious, and gradually, I began to see the possibility. Wanting to change that life, I begged the owner to let me handle the American expansion. I bowed deeply, my forehead almost touching the floor. "Please, Tanaka-san, let me try. I know it's a crazy idea, but I believe we can do it." At first he said I should forget it, but after repeated requests, he finally agreed. Perhaps he saw something in my determination, or maybe he was just tired of my constant asking. That's when my busy days began. The real work was just starting, and I had no idea how challenging it would be. First, I trained to perfectly create the ramen recipe and spent all other time studying English. My days became a blur of noodle making and vocabulary lists. I lived frugally to save money for opening a store and made several trips to America for research. Each trip was a learning experience, not just about the market, but about myself and what I was capable of. It took several years from the decision to actually opening our first US location, but we finally managed to launch. The opening day was both terrifying and exhilarating. Despite various challenges, we kept experimenting and improving, steadily increasing sales until we became a popular restaurant with daily full houses. Thanks to our success, we were featured in famous magazines and online media and even got covered in Japan. The headlines read, "Japanese ramen takes America by storm," and "From Tokyo to New York, a ramen success story." Thompson's International is the company that runs those super popular ramen restaurants in America, right? Thompson International is the company that runs those super popular ramen restaurants in America, right? Mia asked as if suddenly remembering, her eyes widening with recognition. "Yes, you know about us?" "I've been to your Hawaii location. I remember being surprised when I saw the photo there." "So that's why you recognized me," Mia said with a bright smile. Her entire demeanor had changed, the polite interest replaced by genuine enthusiasm. It must have been that commemoration photo they forced me to take during a site visit. I'm camera shy and tried to refuse, but they insisted. I had no idea they displayed in the store. I could die of embarrassment. Then, is this restaurant yours too, Mr. Thompson? Well, yes. After succeeding with the ramen restaurant in America, I returned to Japan with bigger dreams and more experience under my belt. I expanded beyond ramen, successfully launching several bars and restaurants. Each venture was carefully planned, building on what we'd learned from our previous successes and failures. This restaurant was one of our upscale creative dining establishments. We brought in talent from around the world to create something unique, a fusion of French technique with Japanese sensibility. I had come to check not just the food, but also the atmosphere and service level of what was actually being served. Well, that plan got cut short when Blake kicked me out. As I was thinking this, the owner came from the back of the restaurant, and he was a tall, handsome foreigner with striking platinum blonde hair. Eric Laurent, one of the most talented chefs I'd ever worked with. He was a talented professional introduced by William, my ramen business partner. His credentials included training at some of the best restaurants in France, but what had really impressed me was his humility and willingness to learn. He manages most of the upscale restaurants I planned. Since he says his Japanese isn't perfect yet, we always converse in English. His dedication to learning Japanese while managing the restaurants was just one of many things I admired about him. Behind us, I could hear the women exclaiming, "Wow, he's speaking English! Amazing!" Their excitement made me smile. If they only knew how many late-night conversations it had taken to get our business plan right, all conducted in a mix of English, Japanese, and French. After a brief status update and light greetings, the owner asked, "Are you leaving already?" Since Blake had kicked me out and the owner was busy, there was no point in keeping him. Eric had a full house to manage and I didn't want to distract him from his duties. As I indicated this was my plan, there were protests from behind. "Mr. Thompson, let's talk more." "Yes, I barely got to chat with you." Before I knew it, two women had grabbed my arms and were pulling me back to my seat. Their enthusiasm was a complete reversal from their earlier polite distance. It was amusing how they'd show no interest until they learned who I was. A complete 180-degree turn. Human nature never changes, I suppose. I couldn't help but smile, but not wanting to give them false hope, I decided to tell them up front. Unfortunately, the owner is already married. I meant to say I couldn't introduce them, but the models cheerfully replied they already knew them. Apparently, they had keenly noticed the wedding ring on his finger. Their observation skills were impressive. Perhaps I had underestimated them. "I want to talk to you, Mr. Thompson." "Me?" Somehow, I ended up being bombarded with questions from the two models. Their curiosity seemed genuine now, focused on the business rather than just social pleasantries. Since I hadn't joined the blind date looking for romance, their enthusiasm overwhelmed me. I wasn't used to being the center of attention. I preferred to let our restaurants speak for themselves. Blake tried talking to the women between questions, but they now barely acknowledged him. His attempts to join the conversation became increasingly desperate. Finally giving up, Blake just mumbled, "Oh, I see," and stopped talking altogether. He sat there nursing his wine, looking like a deflated balloon. While dodging the torrent of questions, I continued writing notes about the dishes being served. Old habits die hard, and I was still here to evaluate the restaurant after all. When the main course arrived, Mia, who had mostly been watching from the side, suddenly spoke up. "Would it be okay to take a photo together?" My heart jumped again at her smile. I really had no resistance to beautiful women. Some things never change, no matter how successful you become. Since she was an influencer, she probably posts photos of food online. Having her promote the restaurant could have great marketing potential. Her following could bring in exactly the kind of young, trendy customers we were hoping to attract. Oh, sure, though I'm not very good at taking photos. When I reached for her phone, Mia looked puzzled for a moment before giving a small laugh. The sound was musical, genuine. I meant a photo together with you, Mr. Thompson. Oh! I felt embarrassed by both my misunderstanding and the unexpected request for a photo together. Even after all these years, I still sometimes felt like that awkward high school kid. While I'm camera shy, when Mia asked, "Is that okay?" I couldn't say no. There was something about her direct, honest approach that made it hard to refuse. After I agreed, Mia moved to sit next to me. The subtle scent of her perfume wafted over again. Definitely jasmine. Maybe with a hint of vanilla? I thought she'd ask someone else to take the photo, but to my surprise, she held up her phone's front camera. Modern technology still sometimes catches me off guard. To fit both people and food in a phone photo, you have to get quite close. I could feel the warmth of her shoulder against mine. The shutter clicked, and on the small screen was Mia with her beautiful smile and me with my nervous, strained attempt at one. Despite my discomfort with photos, even I had to admit it wasn't a bad shot. While I'm definitely not good with photos, when Mia asked, "Can I post this on social media?" I couldn't refuse. Her enthusiasm was infectious. "Mia, me too! Take one with me too!" Blake pushed his way in from the side, trying to shove me aside. His designer suit was slightly rumpled now, his carefully styled hair beginning to fall out of place. Oh right, he said something about targeting Mia at the start. In all the excitement, I'd almost forgotten about Blake's original goal for the evening. I was about to move seats, but Mia cut Blake off with, "I'm sorry." Her voice was firm but polite, the tone of someone used to handling unwanted attention. "I don't like people who put others down and only brag about themselves, so I'll have to pass, Mr. Wilson." "But..." Even someone as pushy as Blake apparently couldn't persist after being so clearly rejected. His face reddened, though whether from embarrassment or anger was hard to tell. He slumped his shoulders and glared at me. The look of betrayal in his eyes was almost comical, as if I had somehow engineered this entire situation. "How did you become chairman?" Blake's expression as he muttered, "Someone like Jack," seemed more sulky than resentful, like a child who just had his favorite toy taken away. We had both used each other for our own benefit, and besides, Blake's failure was his own doing. I felt no satisfaction in his disappointment, just a vague sadness at how he'd limited himself with his own attitude. "It's thanks to you." When I said this, Blake furrowed his brows, clearly not understanding. The concept that his negativity could have motivated someone seemed beyond his grasp. I had always resigned myself, thinking this was all my life would amount to. But being constantly looked down on by you, I think deep down I felt frustrated. Even when things weren't going well in America, I felt like giving up. The thought of proving everyone wrong kept me going. When I said that in a way it was thanks to him, Blake muttered, "Shut up," like a sulking child. There was something different in his eyes now. A spark of something that might have been understanding. "Blake, you've always been smart and talented. You could do anything. I think you could aim higher without having to put others down." Being lectured by successful Jack just sounds like sarcasm. Damn it, just you wait. Blake gulped down his drink defiantly, declaring he'd make it big too. Perhaps this would be the wake-up call he needed. The awkward atmosphere from earlier had somehow disappeared, and for the first time, it felt like an enjoyable dinner party. The rest of the evening passed in pleasant conversation, with even Blake occasionally contributing something other than boasts. Since that day, Mia and I started keeping in regular contact. Her advice was always spot on and very helpful. She had an instinct for trends and an understanding of social media that proved invaluable. Eventually, we began having meals together more frequently, beyond just messages. Each meeting brought new insights and ideas, and something else, something more personal. Blake apparently still tries contacting Mia occasionally, unable to give up, but complains that she never responds. Some habits are hard to break, it seems. When I casually asked Mia about it, she replied with a dazzling smile. I blocked him because his ulterior motives were so obvious it was scary. Her beautiful smile was almost terrifying. I could only respond with a nervous laugh. She had a way of being completely direct that still caught me off guard sometimes. As expected of a model, Mia has great sense and is very trend conscious. Her years of experience in the fashion and social media world gave her insights that I never would have considered. The restaurants that implemented her suggestions quickly became popular among young people. Her understanding of what makes a space Instagrammable transformed our dining rooms into social media hotspots without sacrificing the quality of food or service. As an influencer herself, when Mia liked one of my restaurants and posted photos, that location would become so popular it required reservation months in advance. Her followers trusted her judgment, and she never recommended anything she genuinely didn't believe in. While Mia and I grew close through work, she's now become my partner in private life as well. It happened gradually, naturally, like the slow simmering of a perfect broth. I remember the day I finally worked up the courage to ask her out properly. We were doing a food tasting at one of our new locations, and she was giving her usual thoughtful feedback about presentation and lighting. "The garnish needs more height," she said, studying the plate from different angles. "People love dimensions in their photos." "Would you like to have dinner with me?" I blurted out. "Not for work, I mean, just dinner." She looked up from the plate, and for a moment, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Then she smiled. Not a professional smile, but something softer, more personal. "I was wondering when you'd ask," she said. We support each other, sometimes pushing each other forward, building a good relationship. Her confidence helps me overcome my natural shyness, while my attention to detail complements her big picture thinking. Until now, I had always given up thinking, someone like me. The words had become a mental barrier, an excuse to stay in my comfort zone. While being looked down on was frustrating, maybe I had internalized that complex, believing I deserved it. It's strange how other people's perceptions can shape our view of ourselves. But it was precisely because I wanted to prove wrong those who looked down on me that I became who I am today. Every dismissive comment, every condescending laugh had become fuel for my determination. Rather than staying discouraged, I learned the importance of turning any situation into an opportunity. Even Blake's attempts to use me as a prop had led to valuable restaurant research and ultimately meeting Mia. I can't thank enough all the wonderful people I've met along the way. William, who saw potential in our small ramen shop. Tanaka-san, who trusted me with his recipes and reputation. Eric, who brought his talents from France to help realize our vision. And Mia, who showed me that success doesn't have to change who you are. Moving forward, I want to live always remembering this gratitude and facing forward. Each day brings new challenges and opportunities, and I've learned that the key is not where you start, but how far you are willing to go. The other day, I received a message from Blake. He started his own advertising agency focusing on restaurant promotion. "I'm going to be bigger than you," he wrote. "Just you wait." I smiled as I read it. Some things never change, but maybe that's not always a bad thing. After all, we all need something to push against, something to prove wrong. I wrote back, looking forward to it. Maybe we can work together someday. Because in the end, success isn't about putting others down. It's about lifting everyone up along with you, even if it takes some people a little longer to learn that lesson.